it's EPICTORIAL time! As you just saw in today's effect, we're going to be doing this fancy respawn effect where the flare goes down and then you pixelate in. Good stuff. Yeah, this one's actually pretty easy. It's not nearly as in-depth as last week. Just a little bit of pre-comping, so it might get a little confusing, but for the most part, you should be able to handle it pretty well. Again, this effect is done entirely in After Effects. The only thing that you'll need other than just the regular toolset is optical flares, and you can find that on Video Copilot. It's a great tool. I love it. It's awesome for pretty much anything. My friends and I filmed a cool video over the weekend, and here's a quick snippet.
In their tongue he is Dovahkiin, Dragonborn!
That's all you're getting. I've only filmed it, I haven't started working on it yet, so I don't know whether I'll be able to get it all done by Tuesday, in which case I would release it instead of a tutorial, or I might just release it later that week and have a tutorial as well. What would you guys rather? Go a week without tutorials? This is the obligatory part where I say follow my Facebook and like my Twitter. Wait, what? Anyway, let's do the effect. Alright, so let's take a look at our effect here, and as you can see, basically I come respawning in on the scene and they respawn and look at me. Now what's going on here? Basically, there is nothing here. We have a clean plate, and then I'm here reacting to them. But in this situation, you don't want to have two separate clips because, and as I'll show you, the lighting just changes too much between different takes. And so I'll just go ahead and start making the tutorial. If I drop the footage out, I actually have the entire original clip, which is like a minute in length. And as you can see, as I scrub through it, the lighting changes dramatically as the clouds fly by, and then when I'm actually doing the scene. So if I was to have taken some, a clean plate shot and then done the effect, I would have had to clean up a lot more when it comes into replacing me with the background. So what I did essentially was come into the frame and then do the effect as they react to me. So I can then use a freeze frame from just before I get in to do this for. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'll go ahead and select the footage and hit Control D to duplicate this, and I'll do this twice. 1, 2, and you'll see in a moment. If we select our middle layer with me just about to come in scene, so we can actually go back one more if we want, and I will right click, go to Time, Freeze Frame on this middle layer, and on this top layer we can go in and find just before I jumps about. Yeah, another thing, I jump up. You could also jump off of like a small little stool, for instance. That also works perfectly fine. For this, I just jumped, and you could use the stool as long as the stool's out of the shot, obviously. So just before max height, let's go with that one. And let's select these two layers and hit Control-Shift-C to pre-compose these two layers. And we'll go ahead and label this our matte. And if we go into it, and Alt left bracket right away, and just before we do this, let's go ahead and trim our composition a little bit. Hit B on the keypad, and then go forward, and then hit N, so it's B and N right next to each other. Right click on the bar and trim comp to work area. So now we have about 5 seconds or so of footage to work with. Perfect. So now if we double click on our matte to go into our thing here, basically we're going to set our top footage here and set our transfer mode to difference. And essentially, without going into the math of what the pixels are doing, essentially any pixel that is the exact same as the layer underneath it will go to black. So as you can see, the background is basically all the same, so the background is for the most part black. I come in and I'm obviously very different from the background. So let's go ahead and pre-compose both these layers again. Control-Shift-C, and we'll label this our difference layer. And take pen tool and just kind of select what we want. I have the Roto Bezier curves on. All right. So now this just kind of makes everything black. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this entire image into nothing but black and white. Essentially, it's going to be a matte, just like you would have out of a green screen. So if I type in hue and saturation, double click that, we can set the saturation down to 0, Now if we type in levels, you can double click on that. So here we're just going to try to clip as much white and black as we possibly can. So if I increase the white a lot, and then you'll notice that the background starts coming in. We don't really want that, so let's clip the black until just about there, and we can move the gamma over to kind of restore as much of the, we just kind of want the background gone. Okay, so as you can see, without it, with it, and we'll go ahead and add another levels. So it's going to be levels number 2 here, and we're just going to crush it. Crush as much white as possible, and maybe one more again, and we've basically gotten everything we can out of this image as far as just color correcting to get everything white. But as you can see, we still have a lot of this blackness here, which we don't particularly want. It's not the biggest of deals, but if we're looking for a bit of a nicer mask. So let's go ahead and type in fast blur and bring that in. And if we blur it out, you'll notice everything kind of becomes smoother, but we also don't entirely get rid of the blackness, which is what we want. So if we say set this to like 5, and if we hit Control A on the effects panel and just minimize everything, we could bring our open up our fast blur, bring this up before we start applying the levels. It fills in, and that's just on 5. If we increase it, it actually just get rid of those, kind of have a little bit of a matte going. Perfect. As you can see, get rid of it. It also increases the outside layers too, which, you know, again, if we go back to our footage, set our footage to a track matte of Luma matte, and we basically identify that anything from this matte here, anything that's white, shows up in the footage. But we also still want the rest of the background, so we'll go ahead and duplicate our bottom footage here, move it down below, and make sure to set your track matte back down to no mattes. And of course, we also have to pre-comp both of these. There's a lot of pre-comping going on, and the names don't particularly matter. And we'll go ahead and Control-Shift-C, and we'll name this Respawn Actor. So if we solo this, we can actually go back till just before it pops out. Page down. All right, so page down, Alt left bracket to cut it to there, and just kind of go up a little bit and say right there, and then Alt right bracket. This is essentially the respawn that we're going to be having. So if we solo this, you can see it's perfectly matched up. Now we need to put something underneath him. So this is where we're going to go ahead and duplicate our bottom footage again, and we'll go right back to where we have that freeze frame. Say right here, right click, time, freeze frame, and we go to our mask, and we'll just basically the same thing we did before. We're just going to identify this middle area here that's not being used, so we could put this underneath our final little cut. All right, now as you can see, I'm cut out and then bam, into existence. Almost done. So if we select, well, we don't want to double click. I still need to get a new mouse. Sorry, guys. You can see here, we, just in the time it takes to go from here to here, the sun changes. And you can see the color difference in this line right here. So we want to match that up. We'll go ahead and go back to our levels. And it got a little brighter, so we want to make it a little darker. And to do that, we'll just bring this in ever so, not that one, the top one, ever so slightly. And make sure you also apply it to the right layer, because I saw nothing was going on. When that happens, you check to make sure that you have the levels applied to the right thing. If we turn off our mask, we'll be able to see our edge easier. Just kind of darken it up ever so slightly. And see right there, it's, you can't even tell right here, a little bit right here, and for the most part, it's very unlikely that anyone will notice. But just in case, with your layer selected, hit F and go set a feather of about 20. And then no one will ever know that you have that there. Just pop into existence, bam, easy, enough said. So now the fun part comes of animating the pixelation. To do that, we'll go ahead and go to our first frame here, zoom out, and we'll click our square rectangle tool and just draw a really wide square. And just line it up with the top of your footage. And we'll go to our mask settings and go to mask path, hit the stopwatch to set a keyframe. Go down about 10 frames, so I'll hit page down 10 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. And we'll just double click on it and scale it down to reveal, and then just go just to the bottom there. So as I fall in, it's like I'm being revealed in. Pretty cool part right there. But then I disappear. What happens there? And that's because our layer here then comes into play. So if we just go to about right here, so actually further, and hit T on the keyboard to bring up your opacity, set a keyframe, go down like 4 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, set it to 0, goes out. And same thing here. We can go to just before this cuts out and go to our respawn actor, hit T, hit our opacity, just go down like say 3 frames, 1, 2, 3, and set this to 0. And of course we don't need anything really after that. Alright, so if we just look at it as it is, I'm just bleeping in like that, but we kind of want to animate a little bit more than this because this looks a little tacky. But that's pretty cool. So we go ahead and go to our first frame here and we'll type in Mosaic and bring this onto our footage. Make sure you have your footage selected, or you can just drag it to your footage, for instance. And right away you'll see nothing but giant squares, essentially. And that's what it does. If we increase this, we increase the number of squares in each thing. But squares isn't technically the correct term. It's like just slots, because you have the number of horizontal and vertical blocks that you can have in a thing. So if we have, say, both of this set to 40, and this to 40, we have, actually I'll just set this to 10 and 10. Better demonstrate my point. It slices it according to its original aspect ratio, and most of you guys are going to be using probably DSLR footage, and at the very least widescreen footage. So as you can see, it cuts it into, if we have it the exact same number of blocks for horizontal and vertical, it's going to perfectly scale it down in size. I specifically just wanted squares, and because I know that the aspect ratio of footage is 16:9, if I go to horizontal blocks and put in 16, and our vertical blocks to 9, this is a perfect square right here. The dimensions are the exact same. You just kind of undo the aspect ratio. And to do this, essentially, you could have it like that. Just kind of come in, and then it fades out to your actor, and you're done. I still think this looks really tacky. So to fix that, I animate the amount of blockiness, pixelation, if you will. So if I go, say, to here and just start it at 16:9, set a keyframe for both horizontal and vertical, and then go to the end of your keyframe, or into your layer, just about as it's fading out, and say, add this to 160:90. And there you have it. It starts to animate in. And the last couple things you can do is, if we hit U on the keyboard to bring up our animation, select all of your keyframes like that, and hit F9 on your keyboard to turn them into ease frames. But I think because I have my recordings going, I'm going to go down to easy ease. And this just kind of eases the animation in a little bit. I like to have it be a little bit blockier on screen before it starts changing, and actually change it a little slower. So I'll take these last couple and just move them out more. So it really transitions nicely with the fade out. Voila! That's basically the effect. We're going to add, of course, the optical flares here in a moment, but that's essentially what's going on, is just you animate the mosaic from low resolution to high resolution, and then it fades into perfect resolution. So, okay, the next thing we'll do is we'll hit Control Y to bring up a new solid, and let's go ahead and name this our optical flare. Make comp size and hit OK, and we'll go ahead and bring out our optical flares itself. So double click. We have our, typical default lens flare, something we don't particularly want just yet. So if we go ahead and make this over transparent and set the entire layer to a transfer mode of add, it'll blend nicely with the footage. So let's go back to our very first frame here. And we'll just set this to just out of the frame right here and set a position keyframe. And then we'll go down to our final, just as the last square hits the bottom. Let's move this to the bottom. Make sure it lines up a little bit more nicely than that. It's a little, I'm a little bit off-centered to the side. And that looks pretty good. You could even edit it a little bit more along the way, but then you have, 3 keyframes. So I don't want that. And your center point you can go ahead and put up to the top. I like to just put it off to the right a little bit here, and there you go. Just something to kind of show you. Oh, another thing, go to your first position keyframe, add a keyframe for brightness, and if we hit U to bring up our keyframes for optical flares, we'll go to our second one, and then hit another keyframe, this little switch over here on the far left. So now we have 100% keyframes for here. We go up 1, 2, 3, and we could just move our position off screen a little and set our position, or rather our brightness, down to 0. So that way it kind of animates on screen, and then 1, 2, 3, past it, and move it off screen again, just a little bit, and set our brightness down to 0. So now we can go ahead and select which, optical flare we want if we get rid of our editor. Let's go to our preset browser, and I have Pro Presets, which is amazing. I definitely recommend you get it if you don't have it, from Video Copilot, of course. And the reason why is because there's a very specific lens flare in here that's already made that I actually really, really like a lot, and it's called radio waves, and it's because it's got these crazy little circular things around it that kind of looks like I'm surrounded by a giant slinky, which I think is awesome. I totally have always wanted to be surrounded by a giant slinky, a human slinky, if you will. All right, so you can end it right here again, but I'm going to go into a little bit more further detail on how I kind of just spiced up my own effect here. And for instance, I changed the color here. I tint it a little red, just to kind of take the edge off of just the extreme blueness that is the original default effect. And you can, tint it whatever color you want. Just a little bit of red because I like the blueness. Just to kind of take the edge off. Oh my God. Take the edge off of the flare. Yeah, I'm not a druggie, I swear. Okay, what else do I do with that? All right, let's go back to our options, and there's a couple things I like to add. For instance, removing these secondaries here. And no, not the secondaries, the reflections. There are these little horizontal lines that kind of appear around this vicinity towards your center point. And I think they're really distracting from the main horizontal thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide these reflections so that I only have just kind of like the beam that comes on and the main beam itself. And if we go to our lens objects, I will go down to the hoop and add that. For this, I'll set the opacity to 65% and maybe the scale down to 65% as well. And this will basically make it so that as I'm coming on, or rather as the flare animates downwards, this flare gets larger. And that's only if you set your center position to be off to the side up here. And you can change it to wherever you want, for instance, and it'll change the flare accordingly. Remember, if you have it perfectly centered, it kind of ruins the rest of your flare, if you chose this one. And you don't want it so far out that you don't see the circles. So just a little bit off center and up top like this. Something about right there. And that makes it cool so that as the flare goes down, that little hoop expands outwards, kind of like a shockwave, ever so slightly. You don't want to have it super obvious. And that's pretty much the final effect. Oh, come on screen there. Let's go ahead and trim this up to about that point. Trim comp to work area. Bam. Let's go ahead and preview this, what we just made. All right, I'm actually really satisfied with that. That looks pretty nice. Woo! You finished the video. How does it feel? How does it feel? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't ever seen my videos before, I highly suggest you subscribe because I'm going to be releasing these every week. Or as some of you guys have pointed out in my last video, I said subscribe every Tuesday. If that's what it takes, subscribe every Tuesday. Again, Facebook, Twitter in the descriptions. See you there and see you next